There's something about in understanding resilience as opposed to pathology. So there's two ways we can approach this problem of kids disengaging. We can focus on the pathology, on the problems, and look at it from how do you suppress a learning disorder? How do you treat ADHD? How do you suppress antisocial behavior or disengagement or depression? How do you deal with homesickness or loneliness and all those other things? How do we deal with the problems? That's not actually what I do, though. I don't really study that stuff anymore. I used to in my career. I have a background in that. I switched a while back, and now I kind of look at, well, rather than just talking about suppressing disorders, what if we actually started talking about building capacities? What is it that actually engages young people well in their worlds? What if we started talking about positive relationships, and we started talking about power and control, identity, sense of culture, continuity of attachments? What if we started talking about physical structures, housing, social safety nets, access to services? And we started talking about the way systems gather around to facilitate resilience. That's what I do. So I'm looking at the complexity of kids' lives and how we can actually build from that to actually improve young people's lives. So let me bring up if I can bring up the slides. So what I've been doing is basically trying to figure out patterns of resilience. And what I'm hoping to do in this particular presentation is give you an opportunity to really just concretely think about the implications of this for your work. By the way, the break, I just want to check, the break time is at? It's going to be at 10. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you, I just want to sort of vaguely introduce a couple of key ideas, and then I want to keep applying it to your particular young people that you work with. So this gets progressively from a bit of theory, sorry I have to give you that, down to really, really practical ideas as we go along. But I just wanted to show you something. This is actually some data, not from my own research, but from someone else's research. And it's a cohort study out of British Columbia. Fascinating that if you actually look at patterns amongst children who have been physically abused and sexually abused, right? And you look at them and you ask those kids, are you suicidal? Do you have suicidal thoughts or feelings? A remarkable number of those kids say yes to that. But here's an interesting one. If you also ask the kids who have been physically and sexually abused, do you feel connected to your school? Do you feel engaged? Is a school a place where you feel like you belong? Do people know you at your school? Is education important to you? And those kinds of questions. In other words, are you engaged in educational? Does education give you hope for the future? As kids answer those questions, yes, their rates of suicidal ideation, despite having been abused, drop dramatically. In other words, think about this. If you have a kid and you meet them and they say they're suicidal and they've been abused, your very first intervention should be to ask them, when you go to school, does anyone greet you by name when you get to school each day? Does a vice principal, does a teacher literally come out and say, welcome, I'm glad you're here today at school? In fact, at the schools where you work, how many of your kids get greeted by name as they enter the school campus each day? No? Is this not common? It should be. It's an amazingly effective way of signaling, oh, you look a little tired. Did you bring a lunch today? Are you going to have a good day? Something happened. I heard that kid was getting on your case yesterday. How's that thing working out with your teacher? A moment of that for a vulnerable kid can not only keep them in school, it can also make them less suicidal. By the way, just so we don't get this wrong, I'm not saying unemploy all the psychologists. I have friends who are psychologists. They have mortgages. I don't want to unemploy them. But I am saying that we shouldn't be necessarily using that kind of service as often as we think. It's kind of more of a secondary thing. Now, so basically what I do is I go all around the world looking for these patterns, what it is that makes kids resilient. And whether or not I took you to places like, take you to Tanzania, I could take you to Jerusalem, maybe to southern Florida, Ireland, let's go to South Africa, or perhaps Palestine, Maybe you want to I can take you over to China. We could hop over to Russia, which has a huge number of orphans at the moment. Or perhaps I just take you back to places in Halifax, Canada, where I come from. What you would begin to see is a common understanding of resilience. Now, when we use this word resilience, we've tended to think about it as individual kids bouncing back from adversity, but actually that's a really awful description of it. The reason I say that is that our tendency is to, if we say that resilience is our capacity to overcome adversity, have you noticed the language says it's all about your responsibility to fix yourself? Resilience is the capacity to overcome adversity means that I have to overcome adversity. That's not what the research actually shows. It's a myth. It's the kind of Oprah-like myth. It's a buzzy idea that makes good motivational speakers. It's great for TED Talks. It sucks as science. The actual reason that most people overcome adversity is because of systems that respond to them. Good housing, job opportunities, educational support systems, exactly what you're doing. If you were to account for people's changing trajectories through life, you would see that services and integration of supports and good solid communities and all that kind of stuff accounts for more of people's change, more of their resilience under stress than just a positive attitude. Not that a positive attitude isn't important, but it only takes you so far. So what I've been understanding as a definition of resilience is simply that in the context of exposure to significant adversity, so I'm talking about kids under stress here. When you got a kid under stress, resilience is our capacity as individuals to navigate, to find our way to the resources, all those psychological and social and physical resources that we need to do well. But it's also our capacity to negotiate for those resources to be given to us in culturally meaningful ways. And really what this comes down to, though it's a lot of words, it really comes down to two very basic concepts. I need to be able to first navigate. If I'm out there on the ocean and I'm trying to navigate someplace, you need a destination. What is the point of a kid being motivated to learn if they don't have a school to go to? What's the point of a kid being able to learn, wanting to learn, if he doesn't have a team of supports that bridges the awkwardness of getting him into social situations or her into social situations that she doesn't understand? Now, so navigation is about personal capacity, but it's also about us providing the opportunities to grow. But it's also about negotiation. You have to be able to negotiate with kids so that what they're looking for is given to them, right, in culturally meaningful ways. Have you ever offered a kid a service and they've rejected you? Or has that just happened to me in Canada? You know, you kind of knock yourself out and you think, I'm going to give this to you, I'm going to try and help. And the kid kind of does this little thing with you and says, nah, it's okay, I'm not going to show up. Right? My argument is that the problem is not the kid. The problem is almost always us. We haven't negotiated well. We haven't figured out where the entry point is to engage the young person. The girl on the chair, you could say she was a reluctant learner. We could call her resistant to interventions. We could call her a gang member or a criminal. We could do all kinds of things. Or I could look at her and negotiate with her and say, why would you come to school? And she'd say to me, I'll come to school when I can be the kick-ass leader. And we said, no problem. We'll make a place for you at school so you can be a kick-ass leader. Would you come to school if we do that? She said, sure. Carry on. Hey, let's have some fun. Rock and roll. We'll do this, right? So this is really the energy of what I'm beginning to understand. Now, the last thought, though, is I don't know about you, but if kids are navigating to the resources they need and the world is giving them what they need through negotiation, they're doing great. Why are we talking about them? And the simple truth is this. Kids, well, frankly, they get caught when the world around them won't negotiate with them. I'm not sure if you can quite read that, but the little fellow's been sent up to the board because he's bad. You do not do this in your schools anymore, I hope. Right? Or maybe you do. You know you're bad, you go up to the board and you write lines. This is something that we used to have to do as kids, as children. did this. And you go up to the board and you write, and the kid is up at the board, and he's writing, I will stop my obsessive compulsive behavior. I will stop my obsessive compulsive behavior. I will stop my obsessive compulsive behavior. And he just, in his little mind, goes, it just doesn't get any better than this. And I love the cartoon because this is actually what happens. When we don't create facilitative environments around children, what they tend to report is that they will create those conditions for themselves. They will find the stimulation and the supports wherever they can. If the accommodation and if a school environment is not meeting their psychological and social needs, then they will leave that environment to go back where they find those psychological and social needs. They will go wherever they need to survive and thrive. It's not a negative behavior, it's a drifting towards psychological well-being. Our job becomes to create environments that they can navigate to successfully, negotiate for what they need, and survive and thrive.